on a new TV. Now, just a little experience about my TV buy-in. My first TV ever was given to me as a gift. It was a 4x3, right when 16:9 was coming out. 3-line digital comb filter was the big fancy thing. Panasonic 32-inch. Full screen. Tube TV, of course. I don't know why. It was $400 at the time. I don't know why. I was so excited to get this thing. When I moved out of my mom's house to my dad's house, it did come with me, and I was so happy to have that. Second TV. I thought for sure plasma was going to be the way to go, but I couldn't afford a plasma. So my gift was a 20-inch LCD TV with a DVD combo in the back, and absolutely terrible sound. But that was my second TV. Third TV. First TV that I actually started paying attention to what was in the TV. It was a Samsung. I don't remember if I had a 32-inch first. I want to say I had a some 32-inch first. With HDMI, it was 1080p. Or was that 720p? Whatever it was good. Yeah, in fact, it was. I don't even know it was 1080. But then I know I had a 40-inch. Virtually the same TV as the Samsung 32-inch, but it was a little newer. It was also only 720p, but it also supported 1080i. My big thing at that moment was 1080. And I knew progressive was better than interlaced, and very quickly I determined that I wanted to use 720 progressive over 1080 interlaced, so I would actually, on purpose, set my PS3, which supported 1080p, to progressive to not have it run, because I was running gaming, and I was having fun with gaming at the time. I did actually set it to 720p output instead of 1080i. So I took the hit on the resolution for the better performance of gaming. Similar to how I do that with my gaming computer now. I will gladly take the lower frame rates per second or I will take the lower resolution for a better frame rate. For example, my 4K is fine, but like I don't do the super high graphics. Still very decent high graphics on my gaming computer. Like Legacy was, like I did 1080p for Harry Potter Legacy. Final Fantasy 16 was actually very optimized, so I was able to do 4K 120 FPS on that. But by that point, I had also replaced some of the hardware too. But back to TVs. So also during this time, I was investigating sound. I had actually a very cheap 5.1 sound system. It was passive. It was very low wattage. It did have its own little receiver, but very little. And I switched to a soundbar. I first had a Samsung 7.1 simulated soundbar, but ultimately I ditched that for a Klipsch 3.1 soundbar, and then eventually the Sony soundbar that I used for years, because Sony's great with their sound. It was 3.1, but it had 2 rear speakers that were wireless and Atmos simulation, and was easily the best soundbar. And that was the time I decided to get serious about TVs. I got the LG CX. CX and the GX, they're the same thing. It was technically the GX because it had the stand, but it was literally the same thing, just one had a stand, one didn't. Essentially, it was the beta. Hello, pretty in pink. Do I play Dota? I don't know what Dota is. So getting to the important section was my LG CX. That was my first OLED TV. I had left behind my Samsung, which by that point I had had one other TV, and that was my Samsung. I don't remember the exact model number. That was the first time I bought a TV that was in spring on the going out. It was the first time that I bought a TV that was on its way out. It was open box, so it was even cheaper. It was like a $2,600 TV on sale for $1,600. It was 4K. It was 3D as well. Back when, remember, 3D was a thing. It was silver, not black. But it was a 4K TV, and I saw a massive improvement. And that was Samsung. That was not an OLED, but it was LED. All my previous TVs had been LCD. So I noticed a massive improvement for 4K, because by that point in time, there was 4K content. So now I was very happy with that TV. But then, after a couple of years, I saw OLED. Now keep in mind, this is the CX, once again, is the TV that is going out. This was 4 years ago. This was about in 2021, as the pandemic was coming to a close. Prices were coming back down on TV. And I was looking at the Sony and the Samsung. And Samsung did not yet do OLED at that point in time. So my decision ended up being to get the Sony OLED. That's right, I got the Sony. Ultimately, I decided I did not need 4 2.1 ports. And to be honest, I still don't, because I have an AV receiver now. I need one for eARC, and I could alternate my devices for the other one. So I went home with the Sony, out of box, no power. Okay, I ended up going back and getting the CX instead. Real funny, Jose. Out of the box, I ended up getting a broken Sony. It was either the A90 or the X90, so I went back and I got the CX for the 4.1 ports. And I ultimately decided that the C1, while it had a better processor, I was using an Apple TV and I didn't see a better processor as necessary. This was about that point in time where I started actually looking at what was in the TVs. And I realized at that point in time that G1 was indeed the better TV. But ultimately I could not, I could not afford the $1,000 jump to the G1. So I went with the CX because I used my Apple TV, and that came out of the box, ended up working. I've been using the CX for 4 years now. 4 years, 2 months. And I believed it was the right decision. This is the longest I've ever gone with a TV. Every year that they come out with a new TV, I always go look. For example, the C2. Yes, I saw an improvement over the C1. Its major improvement was a slight brightness boost. But did I see an improvement for the new TV big enough to warrant a new TV after just 2 years? No. C3. I definitely saw an improvement. I also saw an improvement of the G2. Did not see an improvement from the G3 to the G2. No big enough one. But the G2 had an improvement over the G1. I wasn't looking at Sony at the time until last year. But ultimately, I know there were issues with the C4 and that people were saying just stick with the C3. But the G4 over the G3, yes. I saw the major improvements, and I was getting ready to pull the trigger literally a couple of weeks ago on the G4. Because as my eyes adjusted to it, I could see that it was a big enough improvement to warrant it's on sale for $2,000 right now. Days after I realized that I should pull the trigger on the G4, they announced the G5. So here's the interesting thing and why I refuse to go back to Samsung. Samsung, you need to support Dolby Digital. There is tons of Dolby Digital content out there now. Tons. And my sound system, I am in my own like optimized room now where I got a $4,000 sound system, so I need a TV with a quality that matches that. I'm not using a soundbar anymore. But ultimately, now I am waiting on one big thing. Sony has had this issue where if I look at their Bravia 8, I see a little bit too dark. And yes, I know they have the more accurate colors, but also like their A90L, it's just too expensive. And I don't even want to consider mini LED because I look at it and I see the picture too bright. I see mini LED as I know. Don't get mini LED confused with micro LED. Micro LED is something in the future that could absolutely take over OLED, and that's what everyone's talking about. But what is out there right now? We have the mini LED and the Bravia 8 this year. I'm excited to look at a Sony. This is the first time in years I'm excited to look at a Sony because they are the Bravia 8, which is their middle of the road TV, is gonna have the QD OLED panel that I really liked on the more expensive TV last year. That really did give a run for the money to the G4. The G4 was so expensive. I looked at the Bravia 8 and I said if the Bravia 8 was just a little brighter, if it wasn't just a normal OLED, if it had something more, I would buy this. This year, the Bravia 8 Mark II, and I'm so excited to actually see this in person, will have the QD OLED technology. Sony seems to be going in on both QD OLED, which is made by Samsung apparently, and their own mini LED TV. I also know that this year, and this is the reason I ultimately did not pull the trigger on the G4 despite it being at a low price right now, and the G5 is going to be $1,400 more expensive for the 65-inch. I want to see what this 4-stack panel looks like. The G4 was definitely the TV to beat last year based on all the research I did, and that's why I was going to pull the trigger on it. But now knowing that the G5 and the Sony Bravia 8, now called the Bravia 8 Mark II, are going to have completely different panels, this gets me excited to see a war between these two TVs. This won't be like last year's war, where the Sony Bravia 8 was still using a standard OLED similar to the CX that I have right now, which was the same year as the C1 and the I think the B series replaced it, but the CX was not as low class as the B series is. Those are those OLEDs now, or are they just LEDs? I think they're OLEDs, but they're like the cheaper OLEDs. I am so excited, and I'm thinking of making a video about the LEDs. The OLEDs, because I do think this is going to become a war between QD OLED, now that it's available in the middle range with Sony with their QD OLED Mark, their Bravia 8 Mark 8 confirmed now, just a couple of days ago, just a couple days after LG confirmed, they're using a 4-stack panel. Here's my trick. I care about detail, and I care about how well the TVs are going to handle a lighter room. And for the longest time, that's been the LG. Now, while I ultimately got a broken Sony a couple years ago, my dad ended up getting the same exact model, 65-inch, and put it in his room. I have messed with his, and I am glad that I bought the CX over the Sony model of that year, the Sony OLED of that year. That was the middle of the road. Ultimately, it comes down to his is a little darker. Not just that, I don't like the motion they have. I understand that the Sony better matches the Sony reference monitors that and better matches the filmmaker intent. But what good is matching the filmmaker's intent if you're too dark? Now we're at a point where I think with QD OLED, like I look at the last year's Sony, the Bravia 8, and I say, yes, you're beautiful. You're matching the colors. You even handle details a little bit. I don't see as much crust. I don't see as much. You don't bloom like your mini LED does, which is absolutely terrible and so distracted. But you're still a little too dark for me. I think the QLED could solve that. I can't wait to see it in person because the QLED could get me to buy my first ever Sony LED TV. This year I'm in such a good position that I'm ready to buy a higher end TV. Not go as high as the A95 or whatever their high end is. I'm also not going to go with the Bravia 9 because that's a mini LED, and I know that they're making their flagship still a mini LED. But until you get micro LED Sony, I don't think so. I could be wrong, but like right now, looking at last year's mini LED, last year's Bravia 9 compared to the Bravia 8, I'll take the Bravia 8 any day, even though it's darker. But I would still take the LG G4 over it, or honestly, I would still take the LG C4 over the Bravia 8. But that's because we're comparing an OLED to an OLED. I'm doing a lot of research right now. This is the most research I've ever done. Last year, I started getting into the research of OLED, of the QLED. At that point in time, mini LED was not even capable of being in a 65-inch TVs because 65-inch is my sweet spot. I had a 55-inch. My last Samsung was a 55-inch. It was a little too small. I think 77 would be a little too big for my use. I do think 65-inch is my sweet spot. So, honestly, the fact that a Bravia 8 Mark II will only be available in a 55 or 65 still helps me. Also, the fact that I use an AV receiver, so both with 8K pass-through, means the fact that my Apple TV and my computer are both plugged in there, and the fact that I don't use eARC anymore because everything plugs directly into the sound system, means that unlike when I bought the CX, I'm actually okay with only two HDMI 2.1 ports. I'll tell you what killed Samsung this year: the matte finish. I have looked at last year's matte finishes of the Samsung, and in my very bright room, I would rather have the reflection of my overhead lights at the top of the screen than having the light washing out the whole picture. I've seen this in action last year's model in Best Buy before, and I've seen the washout of a matte screen from their higher end model last year that they are bringing down this year. Also, as I said, no Dolby Digital. No Dolby Vision. That's a killer for me. I use an Apple TV. I watch a lot of lower content stuff. I'm sorry, but there is not a lot of HDR10 plus content. Plenty of HDR10 content, not a lot of HDR10 plus. So I'm still riding high with Dolby Digital. But that still does put the Sony in this year. So I think my two TVs this year to watch out for are going to be the Sony Bravia Mark II, the QD OLED, and the LG G5 because of its 4-panel tandem. It's added an additional. I understand what's going on now. I understand that they're adding essentially a second blue panel. So there's going to be a blue panel, a red panel, a green panel, and another blue panel that's supposed to boost the brightness even more. And I understand that Sony is still refusing to do this. They are still riding high with Samsung's QD OLED and their own mini LED. Of course, they want to use their own technology. Here's the thing. I do believe that ultimately Samsung is Samsung has gone the wrong way. I used to love Samsung TVs. But I do think Samsung is going the wrong way, and I do think they are going to pick the wrong technology. I do think they are on a losing battle. Matte finishes, not supporting Dolby Vision. But they got the QD OLED panels right. Or did they? And that's the thing that concerns me. QLED is still out there, but they're the only people using it. Sony, not making QLED. Their other technology is mini LED. LG, not making QLED. LG isn't even making, they're all in on this Force-Stack technology. This right now, to me, is a battle between LG and Sony. Because yes, Samsung made the QD LED panels, and Sony is banking on mini LED, but Sony at least is offering a QD OLED option that I think is going to compete. I'm going to have to see these in person, but if I had to pick a winner last year, I would say the G4. And yes, it's expensive, but I have ridden out with my C4 for a long time. So when I buy a TV this time, I might be willing to spend thousands of dollars like I did with my sound system for a TV that I know ride or die will last. And the scary thing is we've got two panel technologies. QD OLED, which I have been watching closely, and now that's coming on the Bravia 8, it's like, okay. And this new tandem 4-layer OLED versus the 3-layer I'm using right now, which is supposed to be even brighter, which is supposed to look even nicer than the G4 that I was already going to pull the trigger on the G4 over the Bravia 8. But now knowing, my big thing is why I will not pull the trigger on the G4 anymore is because I need to see what these new panels look like in person. Because I do use a very bright room, a very bright TV. And as much as I love color accuracy, I'll tell you what my thing is. Detail. I hate snow. I hate grain. That's why I did not pull the trigger on the G4. Now, this might be because it had a bad signal going to it in the Best Buy versus the Bravia 8 having a better one. When I did the demos, I don't think they had the best signal because when I went to other stores for the G4, I saw that grain was not there. Or even the C4. It's all about the signal. Now, I do think also that some resources I found in my Best Buy that I played, like the gaming source, wow, there was no quality loss there. That must have been coming from a different video server that was playing the TVs. Because, my goodness, when I looked at something like that, you could clearly see. As I get more serious, I looked at the G4 and I said to myself, yes, but won't that snow go away? Because in my experience, the snow that you see in the stores will go away. So I fixed my eyes instead on the crispness of the lines. On the detail, look past the snow. Look at the detail of the gravel. Look at the colors, detail of the brightness. Look at the color contrast. Not color accuracy like the Sony. Look at the color contrast. And I ultimately did end up seeing a massive improvement on the G4. So, the G5 is coming out. The Sony Bravia Mark II is coming out. I'm sitting pretty with my LG CX. My LG CX, and here's the other thing, it malfunctioned. But it was within its 5-year Best Buy warranty. I got a new motherboard put in that thing. So while the panel has no burn-in. It has no burn-in. Really, it doesn't. It still looks beautiful. As I said, I would still hold on. I do not see enough of a jump to switch to the C4 or the Bravia 8. I am very happy with my CX right now. But looking at the G4, I can see right now the possibilities of jumping at that. I was ready to pull the trigger on that. So I want to see now, will the G5 come out? Because I know now that with the G5 coming out, the G4 will stay at that $2,000 price point. Will I see a significant enough difference to pull the trigger on the G5? Or will I support the G4 as I do more research? Or can Sony come out with a QD OLED? Because I saw their higher end one last year and I said, yes, I would take that over the Bravia 8 hands down. In fact, I would probably take their QD OLED over the G4. So LG, you've got competition this year. Because if that Bravia 8 looks anything like their higher end last year, you're not going to beat the G4 is not going to beat it. And it says it's the Mark II. It's going to be with the price range. I am ready to spend. My most expensive TV was my first 4K TV. It was not OLED, but at the time 4K was a big thing, and 3D was still out there. So that was a $2,600 TV. I ended up paying $1,600 for this TV because it was only a year out. $2,600, and I paid $4,000 for my sound system. I am in a good moment right now. I want a TV that's going to last for a long time, which is why I'm being so careful. And I'm going to tell you, if it looks great, if it can convince me, I'm ready to pay for a G5 or the higher end Sony. No, Sony's higher end is still going to be insanely expensive, so I would still probably go with the Mark II. Plus, their higher end they're still ride or die on that mini LED, which I don't like because I'm a detail guy. I saw the Bravia 9. Nope, I would take the 8 of Bravia over that. It's going to be a very interesting year indeed. For me, I've just been sitting back enjoying the new sound system I paid $4,000 for because that has been night and day. My experience right now is not so much focused on my TV so much as that $4,000 sound system I had right now. Dialing it in. It's been dialed in for a couple months now. Oh, totally worth the $4,000 for that system. Totally worth it. 100%. The receiver, the surround speakers, I was wondering if that was going to be worth it. No, that was 100% worth it. And now that I've got it's still an entry level higher end system, but I got 2 towers and 2 bookshelves as my rear speakers, which actually makes them a little louder than I planned, but I just knocked them down. And finally, after the past couple of weeks, I dialed in the subwoofer to its perfect blend. I've got a perfect blend that in my small room, still would have preferred the 100s over the ones, the F100s. But, I couldn't get those. Again, I don't know why I preferred the F1s over the F10s. But I actually really enjoy my sound system. It's wonderful. It's fabulous. It's great. I need a TV to match it. Because while my system is budget, it is one of the cheaper ones. It is still a $4,000 sound system with towers and rear speakers and subwoofers. It is still a million times better than my soundbars were. So, do I ultimately think I will step up to the higher end Sony? Which again, it's a mini LED, so I think that's a killer. Micro LED, yes, I could totally see that. I could totally see a micro LED working. But a mini LED, sorry, I have a bright room, but I think Sony's got to abandon mini LED the same way Samsung eventually abandoned QLED. Now, I've seen the Sony higher end QD OLED, which makes me excited that the Bravia Mark 8, Bravia 8 Mark II coming out this year is also going to be a QD OLED. That is a panel change because they were using the standard 3-stack OLED last year, same as the G4. which did a 5-year. It's going to be a panel battle this year between the Bravia 8, middle of the road, Mark II, and even again with Sony, that might be technically their middle of the road TV. That's their high end OLED, except for maybe the insanely expensive one. With LG, I don't know if they make an insanely. Oh, the M8, right? Their wireless one. That's their ideal higher end OLED. So again, they don't have these insanely high end ones up there. The Sony does. It's going to be interesting to see what is their high end OLED, because there really is no middle now. It's turning out to be like cars, where there's not just 3 choices anymore. There's 5. 5. I can see this year there being. What are they going to have this year? What's Sony going to have? They're going to have the Bravia 3, the Bravia 5, the Bravia 8 Mark II, the Bravia 9. They're going to have the Bravia A whatever, the X whatever. They're going to have like 5 or 6 this year. What's LG going to have? They're going to have their B series, which is their budget series. Not even going to consider that. Because, again, you would think that it would be similar to my CX right now. No, my CX is pretty nice. It is nowhere near the... My CX beats even the B4. Yeah, that's how good it is. Far beats the B4, and despite being 4 years old. B series, not even under consideration. C series, I guess I would still consider it. I do think that there's going to be trickle-down technology to the C5 from the G4, but it's not going to have the new panel. This year, it's all about the new panel. My biggest difference was when I went from 1080p to 4K. But when I went from 4K LED to an OLED panel, I saw another huge difference. I saw details different ways. That is why I ultimately did not ever pull the trigger on the G4. Yes, it's brighter. Yes, it would probably look better in my room because it's brighter. It's still just an OLED with 3 stacks. That's why I was so excited for Sony QLED. Why I was even looking at the QOLED of Samsung. Why I even considered that, despite lacking Dolby Vision. I wanted Samsung to prove to me that Dolby Vision was not needed, but ultimately they couldn't do it. Ultimately, I still saw the Sony OLED is better. The LG OLED is better. I can't wait to see what the Bravia 8 Mark II looks like this year. I'm actually excited for a war between the Bravia 8 Mark II and the G5. The 2 new panels. Those are my 2 TVs this year. Samsung, that matte finish, I don't care how good it is. You're even more disqualified this year, Samsung, because of your matte finish. You're even more disqualified, and that's like, ouch, because I wanted to support you. I wanted to go back to Samsung. That's why I even considered you this year. But with that matte finish, you're even more disqualified. Samsung, what were you thinking with matte? Don't go with this. There were rumors that the Sony was going to be a matte, that the Bravia was going to be a matte finish, and that would have disqualified it too. Thank goodness Sony Bravia 8 Mark II is just changing the panel to a QD OLED and not a matte finish, because otherwise Sony would have been disqualified. So I'm going to probably make a follow-up video at some point, the Sony Bravia 8 versus the G5, and which one I ended up getting. Which one, after 4.5 years of replacing of running with my LG CX, my first OLED TV, QD OLED or 4-stack OLED, which one is going to replace my 3-stack OLED? Or am I going to just end up getting the G4? Or, and this is sadly possible, am I going to just ride out my CX another year?